Hello everyone. My name is Yana, and I'm a Google Ads specialist. I specialize in bringing targeted audiences to businesses with the required parameters. And I mainly scale businesses in different countries around the world using those same AI tools, directly in the Google Ads dashboard. And in today's video, I'll be sharing a truly honest case study. In this honest case study, you'll see a segment from the period before us, and with another team. I'll even explain now, just to keep it honest, why the client switched from us to another team. The idea is to give you a realistic, truly honest case study, not just another one of those success stories where everything is perfect. Plus, when the client came back to us, so to speak. And basically, the challenges that generally exist in these projects and that we face. Because, in case you forgot, let me remind you that the main challenge in scaling any project basically comes down to the type of business and the demand that may exist in certain niches. And, in general, there are also a number of other factors that we'll talk about right now. And this case should show you that nothing in projects happens by chance, that results are the consequence of deliberate actions that are consciously applied in the account. That without a team, basically, you can mess everything up and end up with some kind of unclear loss, so to speak, and I'll show you all of that here. If you don't understand how to scale these niches, the same thing happens. So basically, I want to show you that this project is actually really challenging. Even for a team, it's quite difficult, and it requires time and a lot of actions to scale it. The niche itself has its own specifics. Now let's talk about the particular specifics that are present here. And if you don't know what to do, if you turn to, it's not just about being unproactive. Our team's approach is completely different. Ours is more scientific. We dive deep into product-by-product analysis. Our task is to understand why some products work and others don't, how they work, and what signals are needed for this PMAX. So, we've moved away from the idea that you can't fully automate everything. Some say you should only use manual bids, that you should only start with manual, and that automation is unreliable. Look, that's like still riding around in a horse-drawn carriage instead of switching to an electric car, a diesel, or even just moving from a manual to an automatic transmission. You can do it either way, but there are certain things you need to keep up with the trends. You just have to. Look, the situation with this whole AI trend and its performance is that either you try to break it down into pieces and put it together into the puzzle you need at point B, or you stay old school, as I like to say. I used to be old school too. I believed that by manually setting everything, by controlling as much as possible myself, I would always get a guaranteed result. No. You always need to try something new, test things out, restructure. In other words, adapt to new conditions. So, let me start with the challenges these projects face. Let's say, for example, this is a project about, let's call it everything for the home. There are a lot of projects like this right now. They launch, and they get great results. Not all of them have such a low cost per conversion or such high volumes. This is a typical problem. Moreover, it's very important to understand that the challenge with PMAX and scaling these kinds of projects is that PMAX itself, no matter what the Google reps say, has a hard time scaling everything consistently. In other words, you constantly have to, as I like to say, give it a kick to make it actually work the way you need, because it just won't figure it out on its own. What's more, Google reps often say, split categories within a single PMAX into different asset groups. And when you ask them why, for example, those groups are getting an uneven number of impressions. The Google rep says that the system thinks there's no demand there, no interest, no traffic, so it doesn't show the ads. But when you launch them using a certain technology, a certain approach, it turns out everything sells, everything works great. Exactly. The next challenge with these projects is the variability of the product assortment. The variability means that some product might go out of stock, and your PMAX can collapse. By the way, this is the most common question from business specialists who come for a consultation about their project. Why did it break? And they forget to dig deeper into their own product and inventory analysis. Sometimes your entire PMAX is running only on one or two products, and as soon as they go out of stock, everything collapses. That's why you need to build the right structure, so it learns either to compensate with products from the same set you offer it, or to set up a certain compensatory set of ad campaigns. The next challenge is that, of course, since the business buys products instead of making them, they want to get the lowest possible price per conversion. And accordingly, to achieve this lowest price per conversion, I've added this chart for you, cost per conversion, so you can see that it's not always. So you don't use the excuse here that our conversions dropped because we wanted to lower the cost per conversion. No. Everything should be objective. A low cost per conversion in this account has always been a result of systematic strategies, strategic actions, and a certain compensatory set of advertising campaigns. I'm not going to share my life hacks or tricks in this video case because these are my own methods. In reality, with how quickly even AI tools are changing, it's really important to be able to adapt to everything, to understand which signals to rely on, and what to tweak for it. Of course, Google does make this whole analysis period a bit longer for all specialists, basically for businesses in the account, but that's probably just part of their mechanics, so to speak. The next variability of products lies in what, for example, the second team that was involved during this period encountered, but most likely, they didn't understand what was happening here. If you want to join in, let's do it this way. For a very long period, you can get by on previously collected analytics because you're moving on inertia. But when the AI doesn't receive the right signals, in other words, the bigger the turnover, the bigger the budgets, the more accurate the analytics actually need to be. Because, for example, if you have a budget of 400 hryvnias, an error margin of 5 or 6% during targeting doesn't really create a big deviation from, say, the baseline. It's a very small portion of the budget that's being tested, relatively speaking. But when you're dealing with large turnovers or, for example, with big clients where, the statistics are very mixed, because the product assortment is extremely diverse. In a single category, we don't have something like 100 products. We have a bunch of categories, and each one might have anywhere from a single item to, at most, 10 or 20. So, you need to make sure that the campaign, the whole account, doesn't collapse if, for example, one top category drops out. So, what we do is set things up so that different categories, a varied selection of products, can make up for it if something happens in the account. For example, on a certain platform where there were sometimes issues, like landing pages getting rejected, or something happening on Google's. And even though everything was fine with the website and the developer, everything was technically perfect. So there are basically, with such a diverse product assortment, you often rely on certain items or sales for a period of time. Then, if Google doesn't receive the right signals when targeting that product in search results, it starts to change the traffic. Very often, there's a situation where, for example, your product was getting more and more clicks, conversions were great, everything was going well, and this can happen even outside of holiday periods. Then, for some reason, it starts to drop off a bit. For example, maybe you didn't top up your account here, or something like that happened. It drops a bit, traffic starts coming in again, but there are fewer conversions. Then, at some point, there might be no conversions at all, and it starts to push your products down to zero. And these aren't necessarily seasonal products, like Christmas lights in December or something like that. No, it could be a product that isn't seasonal at all. For example, we have one of the typical cases, actually. We have 2 or 3 product items that converted really well at different times, and then, to get them back in view or to get them selling again. It's not as simple as just launching them in general campaigns or even in a separate campaign. It actually takes a lot of time just to scale it up. So that's another one of those nuances of a constantly changing product assortment, because without going deep into the product assortment, it often happens that your performance drops, you don't understand why, you make some new adjustments and so on, but it doesn't lead to results for one simple reason. There are no results because, due to this inertia, you've lost the products that used to convert, and bringing them back up is actually not that easy. So, we actually have a whole system of developed mechanics for how to bring those products back up. and get them converting again. But honestly, that takes a chunk of time, and it always takes a chunk of time because, for example, as they say, agencies always want clients to stay on support, since Google itself drags out the process of optimizing ad campaigns. I don't know why they do that. Maybe they're adjusting things for Europe or the States, where people really do wait for that long period of time, not like us, where we want everything done quickly. Yeah, that's one thing, and there's another nuance too. I want to show these cases to demonstrate that things really aren't always simple or just a matter of luck. So, I want to actually show a few different periods. The product assortment, in fact, hasn't really changed much. It was the same as before, like in 2023, for example, when the client came to us. I even have some of the dates written down somewhere. And here's the period when it was possible to actually get something properly. So there are these similarities between certain periods, whether the client was with us or not, for example, during some interval. And when, for instance, the team, well, when you're still running on the momentum of previously gathered analytics, but you start making changes without really knowing why you're making those changes. This happens very often. For example, if I see a very complex, well-thought-out system during an audit, I usually try to figure it out to understand how its different parts affect each other. But I haven't seen many situations like that. So, if you see something unusual in an advertising account, like, wow, how could they have set all this up? Think about it. Maybe it was some kind of compensatory structure or a specific setup designed to provide certain analytics. In order for the AI to deliver the results you want, you need to constantly feed it the analytics you need. The days are gone when we used to collect analytics in units, then break it down, and finally arrive at the cost per conversion. That option is still possible, but cutting out the cost component now, in 2025, on PIMAX is pretty difficult. So it's much easier to collect the right analytics from the very beginning. Anyway, let's get straight to the point. To the core of this analysis we had. Yes, the client was definitely with us, I think, during this period. He probably came in July. Here's July, and then August. At this point, we needed an even lower cost per conversion. UC 37 hryvnias. It was excellent. Then we reconsidered those 37 hryvnias, taking into account that each price segment can have its own cost per conversion, because, for example, price segments, they're from, and to somewhere. For those over 900, 1500 hryvnias, most likely, 37 hryvnias really is a limiting factor, relatively speaking. Even during this period, it seems, up to. Let's put it this way, the client was with us until March, until the end of March. So, roughly, this is the time frame. Basically, he was ours during this period. Of course, February here was a bit of a slump for us. I mean, relatively speaking, but we only had 4,746 here, and it was more of a slump in. Well, after December, it's really hard to compare, right? After the holiday season, February became a slump for us somewhere in the second half of the month. That's very important. It just so happened that I wrote in my Telegram channels that I noticed something was happening with Google, that something was going on there. And March 6th, as a result, instead of stabilizing at about this level, we actually dropped quite a bit, and by March we really weren't able to recover. Because these issues on Google's side required us to adapt to them. We followed a tried and true approach, but here you really have to do something. That could be considered an exception. Seeing this, the client decides to try out another team. Of course, I understand him as well. We didn't manage to accomplish the task. In other words, we needed to grow, and accordingly, reach a larger scale. And of course, it's the client's right to try and test this out. It's perfectly normal and reasonable to try something new in order to understand if maybe, as a team, we really are missing something. Naturally, it was disappointing for us to hear this, but still, the client worked for a while with another team. Well, I think that for about 3 months they were basically running on the analytics we had gathered. So, in principle, sometimes people complain when I say, for example, that it takes 3 months for proper optimization, because during all that time we're collecting analytics, stabilizing things, and basically building up this health, just like athletes do. Once you've built up that health, you can then start using it. in the following periods. Look, here's August. Look, here's August, August of 2024. This is for those guys who tell me, well, you're just showing results for the season. Look, here's August. The client, with another contractor, got 2,827 conversions, significantly less. Now look at August with us. Even with a lower cost per conversion, okay, fine, a lower cost per conversion, which you really have to work towards in some segments, and that's basically what we managed to do. But here's an example for you of how, not understanding why these compensatory ad campaigns were created, and instead of scaling things up, they start changing the existing structure. What happened here is that it led to a very rapid decline. And this drop was so significant, really, right here, that the client had several sites, and another site, which had always been smaller, started to seriously outperform this project. So that's the story. The client came to us, I can say, on the 14th of the 10th, that's October. Here, please, take a look. Our starting point is October 14th. That's our reference point. And it turned out that for this period of time, right here, we had very little accurate analytics left. So, right here, a certain advertising assortment, a certain set of products, was actually among the top performers. And then it drastically changes here. Well, of course, the reason for this is that we started to drastically change the structure, for example, the compensatory set of advertising campaigns. This is a combination of certain strategies, combinations of different strategies with a specific set of product assortments that are similar or overlap based on certain metrics or signals when users visit our website. And when you completely change the mechanics, it's like, for example, I don't know. Guys, every time they change their car's tires, they do a wheel alignment. If you don't do this wheel alignment properly, at best, some of the tires will just wear out faster on certain wheels than on others, right? And now imagine that. Let's say, well, for example, I don't know, it's 10 times worse. So in just a few months, you'll wear down the tires on some of the wheels, almost completely ruin the rims, and you won't even notice it. And that's actually the mildest scenario, because there could be a whole bunch of other reasons for breakdowns, so it's kind of similar to that. And getting things back to normal like this is really the result of the team's painstaking work. So the client was with us until about December 13th, meaning they started on October 14th and stayed until December 13th, because basically they needed to be ready for the peak season. But notice that December 2024 in terms of quantity is not equal to December 2023. Of course, there could be issues with demand, the market, or something else. But the problem is that in those 2 months, we simply didn't have enough time to restore the full assortment of products for display. And how do we bring it back? Look, here. Let's look at it objectively. Products convert well here when they're in combos. Why in combos? Because people don't make a decision to buy like, oh, I want this product, I Googled it, and I bought it. No. They browse through websites, look at different products within the store, add some items, fill up their cart, then clear it out. So actually, from the user side, it's quite a long process. And basically, just to bring back this product that was previously being sold, I won't name it, but the client actually has a set of 5 of them. It can even help boost the sales of other products, because whenever its sales dropped, the sales of similar products also went down. Sales. It's not enough to just separate them into a different campaign. It's not enough to simply include them in existing campaigns, because PMax just doesn't want to allocate money to it, so to speak. That is, he does not see any prospects in it. So, it turns out there's a pretty complicated set of actions needed to scale it up. And really, the reason is that December lagged behind even with a higher cost per conversion, 66 hryvnias. It's 66 hryvnias, by the way. Not because the cost per conversion became expensive overall, but because during that period, basically, we, the client themselves, had already realized that there are certain price ranges that can have a much higher cost per conversion. No, for example, products that cost around 3,000 hryvnias, it's really hard to get their cost per conversion down to 40 or 50 hryvnias. But, for example, for products priced up to 600 or 700 hryvnias, it's quite realistic to keep the entire cost per conversion within that range. Really, if your website is pretty good, then in this case the client was genuinely interested in the result. And the reason for this lower result isn't because we failed or because the client wasn't with us since December 13th, but rather because we didn't gather enough data, enough health in the analytics to deliver that same kind of strong performance. January. Of course, it tends to be a weaker month. And really, in January up until the 13th, and then the client comes to us from which date? In January? He comes to us from the 18th. Oh, he comes to us from January 18th. So, most of January is simply lost in the optimization system. By the way, this is one of the clearest examples that the bigger you get, the more support you actually need in your advertising account. In other words, this is a vivid example that things won't just happen on their own. They won't just get done here by themselves. I mean, you can get by pretty well here, like, do quite decently with some basic analytics you've gathered before, right? So, he leaves in March 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the specialists start messing everything up, blah blah, or it happens again. Look, most likely, well, you could dig into the change history right now if you're interested. You could even make a separate video about it, but I don't see the point in showing it in this context. This is exactly a bare, clean case that really shows there are situations where it's very hard for us to fix things. So here, it was already technical nuances on Google's side, that's it. To win, well, that is, we can't reprogram it, but some projects in these periods generally fell to their knees very badly. Well, not ours. We came for an audit. They saw a much bigger drop in conversions, so we actually managed to stabilize things here, and our cost per conversion didn't increase much. So we were really just doing a lot of work to stabilize things, not to grow. Yeah, that was our mistake. Up until March 6th. Yeah, really. Up until the 6th. Until the 3rd or 4th, so that was our mistake. We took a lot of actions. And here, literally, in April 2024, the same CPA, you see, just a few points higher, just more conversions. And here, they're trying to do something. But it's really not what this project needs. It's not working out to scale. They changed the structure, and at some point, maybe, Google starts sending traffic to some products, and no one is keeping track of it. It starts to over-optimize those products. And really, the account starts to slide into some. And I understand that for someone, 2,000 sales in a month is a really great result. I totally get that. But honestly, look, in September 2024, there were 2,000 conversions. And for example, in September 2023, there were 4,800 conversions. Yes, the cost per conversion, according to the exchange rate of the dollar, or more accurately, the pound, probably couldn't have stayed the same. But the number of conversions could have remained the same. Well, we made a leap right away. Here it is. Here it already started. The client came in on October 14th. Here you go. But we didn't have enough time to really ramp things up, so to speak. It's kind of similar to what happened here, where things were also ramping up and the results were coming in pretty smoothly, relatively speaking. And the peak on December 24th is simply smaller for the simple reason that we didn't manage to deliver a large enough push. Why can this take such a long period of time? It's not because I want you to be tied to me for 6 or 7 months or anything like that. There are objective reasons when working with PMAX campaigns. Some people come to me saying, I want very high profitability, while others come saying, I want certain turnover figures. And we always look at the context of the situation that's happening here. Is it possible to do this, or is it not directly possible to do this? So, the higher the competition in the market, the harder it can sometimes be to carve out your share. By the way, what did we do during this period? We also tried to go through part of the product assortment and analytics, just a portion, to understand which competitors we overlap with on which products. Because the auction statistics, I'm not going to reveal them now, so that competitors who more or less know each other don't get that information. Just so that, how should I put it, to find that point, we no longer relied on the analytics from that period or on the products, although we did try to scale it again, to bring it back, because that product assortment survived thanks to this. So, we followed the well-trodden path. We also ran a series of specific tests to find out whether there are products where we overlap more or less with competitors, so we could make targeted bids on them, so to speak, and try to squeeze out that little piece of the auction. By the way, that's also possible. It's a legal and fair way to compete. For example, for your share of the market within the scope of Google's auction. So, if needed, we're not breaking any rules here. We're not doing anything bad to anyone. We're competing fairly for a similar product assortment in the auction, but that's why it's more valuable. I don't have any significant categorization there. Again, it took quite a bit of time just to try to find a set of product assortments, because each of them advertises the same set. Here's a vivid example of, well, guys, this is what I mean. By the way, those who are die-hard ho-ho fans will say that I made up some kind of weird conversion there. These are all purchase and sales. Braffs, guys. Here it is. You see? All of this, these are purchases. All the numbers add up. Here you go. 838. 11,400. So you don't think I'm just making up something unbelievable here. I mean, so you literally understand how it all happened. This is an honest, transparent case where we were with the client and couldn't handle some technical details. That's already on the client's side, whether they trust us or not. That's a whole different story. We missed something in the analytics, couldn't scale up, and crashed. Same periods, guys. You can see that these are similar periods, not tied to seasonality. Like, September isn't tied to November, right? November wasn't that great for us either. Here it's almost 7 or 8,000, here it's 300. But, excuse me, even raising an account from its knees to 1,740, excuse me, that's a very small number. I mean, for this account, with that kind of assortment, the analytics show it managed to stretch conversions pretty well. So that's an example of a case I wanted to show you. Not a super successful success, but still a success. That's what I think. I've explained the reasons why. For example, it didn't even take off for the client during the season. I've described the dates when the client was active and when they weren't, so you can basically understand the context of what's going on here.